Sunday, January 5th, 2020, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. This morning, I want to talk about how war is a racket. I'm going to reference War is a Racket by Smedley Butler, a small pamphlet. Very interesting. Recommend you get one if you don't have one already. And I want to reference also Randolph Bourne. Randolph Bourne was a progressive writer and intellectual in the early 1900s. He was a critic of the war, World War I, and he said that war is the health of the state. Of course, I don't have to tell you what's going on in relationship to Iran and the Middle East, but I think it's important that we look into this. I do cover geopolitics, and it will affect the markets. It's already affecting the markets. We saw big moves in stocks on Friday. I moved down quite a bit early on. It did rebound, but still finished lower. We saw big moves up in crude oil. We saw big moves up in precious metals, especially gold. Silver didn't really hold on to its gains. So there are many who think that a high oil price is beneficial to the financial system, and that to some extent is true. A lot of the Wall Street banks, a lot of the financiers, hedge funds have financed a lot of the energy sector in the last few years, and they need oil to stay up, especially with the fracking, the advent of fracking. The price of oil needs to stay at a certain level, but I think it's also important that it doesn't go up too much, because then it could kill off the consumer, and we know that 2/3 of the US economy is based on consumer spending, and I guess you can translate that to also economies like the UK and European or EU economies. So it's not very clear cut. I've seen that over the weekend, for example, right now, IG index here in the UK, which is the system I use, I have an account with them. They have weekend prices. They have weekend Wall Street right now. They're pointing a change of minus 88 points. FTSE minus 14. So we'll have to see later on tonight what happens to the markets. So it's not as clear cut as to what impact oil could have on the economy. Wars, of course, should be good for the big corporations, and that's why I'm going to look into War is a Racket. There's also the story about Jesse Livermore on the Richard Smithson book that I have recommended many times before, and he talks about an incident where Jesse Livermore was going away with a good friend of his on a private train car. At the train station, his friend dropped his hat, and inside the hat was his friend's initials, WAR. And for some reason, Jesse Livermore looked at that and thought, wow, we're going to have a war. And he was right. It was just before World War I kicked off. Yes, the stock exchanges did close in the US right after war was declared. War kicked off in Europe in 1914. But in the long term, the US corporations did very well from that war. So it's not really clear cut. I personally think war is always good for the big corporations. I looked into this a couple of weeks ago. Congress adopts defense bill that creates Space Force. This is not just about the Space Force. So this is from December 17th, so not long ago. So I'll read here from the article. It says Congress has approved a compromise defense bill that creates a new space force in exchange for establishing paid parental leave for federal workers as part of a $738 billion package for the Pentagon in 2020. The next section here will show you that all the military, all the wars, yes, we might see politicians from the left criticizing President Trump about his actions in Iran. But if you look at where the money, if you follow the money, you see that they're all for war. Because if you read here, it says the Senate overwhelmingly approved the bill Tuesday, 82-8. Just days after the House passed it, 377-48. The bill now goes to the White House for President Donald Trump's signature, and he has signaled he will sign the defense policy measure. So all I'm trying to say, war, military spending, the politicians love it. And all that you see on television, one side criticizing the other, is theater, in my opinion. And this has got to do, of course, also with war being the health of the state, which I'll look into. There's an article from the Mises.org website about Randolph Bourne's quote. So now let's look at this small pamphlet, War is a Racket, the anti-war classic by America's most decorated soldier, Smedley Butler. So I'll go through it a little bit here, not through the whole book or pamphlet. Just give you some background on Smedley Darlington Butler. So he was born in Westchester, Pennsylvania, 1881, educated at Haverford School, awarded 2 Congressional Medal of Honor medals, one for the capture of Veracruz, Mexico, 1914, one for capture of Fort Riviere in Haiti, 1917. So he was doing the bidding for the military-industrial complex. Smedley Butler, Distinguished Service Medal, 1919, Major General, United States Marine Corps, retired October 1st, 1931, on leave of absence to act as Director of Department of Safety, Philadelphia, lecturer in the 1930s, Republican candidate for Senate in 1932, died at Naval Hospital in Philadelphia, June 21st, 1940. So that was General Smedley Butler. Let's just read here from chapter 1 a little bit what he says. War is a racket. War is a racket. It has always been. It is possibly the oldest, easily the most profitable, surely the most vicious. It is the only one international in scope. It is the only one in which the profits are reckoned in dollars and losses in lives. A racket is best described, I believe, as something that is not what it seems to the majority of the people. Only a small inside group knows what it is about. It is conducted for the benefit of the very few at the expense of the very many. Out of war, a few people make huge fortunes. So, and it goes on to say, in World War I, a mere handful garnered profits of the conflict. At least 21,000 new millionaires and billionaires were made in the United States during the war. That many admitted their huge blood gains in their income tax returns. How many other war millionaires falsified their tax returns? No one knows. So I'll stop at that. I'll go to the end here where he's got a little table, and I'll show you that. There's a table here comparing, has the companies, the big companies, average profit in the last pre-war year, and then average profits during the 4 years of war. So, and I'll go through it now. So U.S. Steel, before the war, average profit $105,331,000. Average profit during the 4 years of war, 259,653,000. DuPont, 6,092,000 pre-war. The 4 years during the war, 58,076,000. Bethlehem Steel, 6.8 million pre-war, 49.4 million during the war. Anaconda Copper, 10 million, and then 34 million. American Smelting, 11.5 million, 18 million. Republic Iron and Steel, 4 million to 17 million. You get the idea. I mean, American and British manufacturing, 172,000, 325,000. So huge profits during war. And we know that if things pick up in relationship to Iran, there's going to be a lot of military spending. They've prepared for it with, I think this 738 billion. I think around 660 was normal defense, and the other 70 billion was for war. So they probably even knew that this was going to kick off. And this is both sides. So all the division between Democrats and Republicans and Trump, it's just acting. This is the health of the state. And I would even argue that in Iran, it's the same thing. And I don't think it's going to escalate, even though it's always a worry that it could escalate into a major World War III, for example. But I don't think that's going to happen because it's not in the interest of the people running these countries or these states. If you see Iran, last year, they've had a lot of protests. And yes, I know these headlines are from mainstream media publications, but it says here, New York Times, December 1st, with brutal crackdown, Iran is convulsed by worst unrest in 2019. Amnesty.org, Iran, more than 100 protesters believed to be killed as top officials give green light to crush protests. Iran protests from the BBC, videos reveal crackdown regime tried to hide. The Guardian, House Street protests across Middle East threaten Iran's power. So Iran is their deep state, so to speak. They're in trouble as well with the general public. They've had the sanctions imposed by the Americans for the last few years. Trump killed off the Iran deal. So they're in trouble as well. What about America? Well, America, the problem, and it's not only America, but the whole of the West, is debt. Debt, financial instability. And you might say, what financial instability? The stock market is at all-time highs. Well, don't forget the repo market, right? The Fed has said that it's going to make available at least $500 billion up until the middle of January or the 21st of January to calm down the repo market. Repo market, of course, is where Wall Street and their clients finance overnight activities by parking collateral with each other. And why do they do that? Well, because that's how they finance speculation, leverage, and it's the cheapest way to do it normally, even though back in September, that overnight repo rate spiked up to 10%. So the Feds had to step in. So there's trouble as well, not just in Iran. There's trouble in the U.S. financial system, in the world international banking system. So war helps. War helps, as Smedley Butler said, it helps the very rich. It's very profitable. It will probably keep helping Wall Street, City of London, the major corporations. And it will help Iran as well. They've supposedly put up a red flag which means revenge. And so what do I think might happen? Well, I think it's good to look at the people who plan all this. And one of these planners is the Council on Foreign Relations, which is the American arm of Chatham House, the Royal Institute for International Affairs in the UK. This group was created by the Cecil Rhodes Trust. Rhodes, of course, was financed by the Rothschilds in the late 1800s, went into South Africa, built up the De Beers Diamond Empire. What else? You've got the Rhodes Scholarship, which Bill Clinton was a graduate of. A lot of influential people in the US have been Rhodes Scholars. So yeah, the CFR is part of this clique. And Richard Haas, who's the president of the CFR in New York, this is what he's saying. And I've got his some of his tweets here in relationship to what's going on in Iran, right? He says, make no mistake, any war with Iran will not look like the 1990 Gulf War or the 2003 Iraq wars. It will be fought throughout the region with a wide range of tools versus a wide range of civilian, economic, and military targets. The region and possibly the world will be the battlefield. So it's going to be great for the people who benefit from war. It's not going to be great for the average individual in Iran, in Iraq, in the Middle East, in the United States. It's going to be great for Wall Street. It's going to be great for Congress. No matter what side of the aisle you're on, it's going to be great for the state, the health of the state. So with the health of the state, let's look into Randolph Bourne. So I've taken this article from the Mises Institute talking about this quote that he made, war is the health of the state. And I'll just go through some of the excerpts of this article. Don't have to go through the whole thing. So it says here, country or society is a concept of peace, tolerance, of living and let live. But state is essentially a concept of power, of competition. It signifies a group in its aggressive aspects. And we have the misfortune of being born not only into a country, but into a state. As we grow up, we learn to mingle the two feelings in a hopeless confusion. It goes on to say, to sum up Bourne's preceding argument, in times of peace, people pursue their own self-interest, identify with society, interact with government, and only occasionally encounter the sanctified state. Goes on to say the impact of war. Bourne defined war as the ultimate act of statehood, as the utmost act of a group in its aggressive aspects. He wrote, war is a function of states, and it could not exist except in such a system. Bourne argued further that war blurs or erases the lines that separate government from the state and both of them from society. The blurring happens largely with the individual himself. And this is the interesting part. Stoked by emotion, the average person fills with patriotism and loses all sense of the distinction between state, nation, and government. Bourne described the process. Patriotism becomes the dominant feeling and produces immediately that intense and hopeless confusion between the relations which the individual bears and should bear towards the society of which he is a part. So I'll end right here. I could keep going, but I think that's enough. Patriotism, yes, it kind of turns up the volume on patriotism. And you can see with what's happening in Iran already, people rallying behind the state, the regime. In the United States is going to be the same thing. I listened to Gerald Celente yesterday. He said people are going to wave their flags. They're going to bring out their yellow ribbons. So yes, and it's mostly going to benefit the big corporations and the state and Washington, D.C. So you decide whether Donald Trump is really fighting the deep state and the swamp and the state itself, if he's really trying to abolish the Federal Reserve and take power away from the big corporations. The way things are going now in Washington, D.C., in Tehran, tells me that, yeah, both the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran are going to benefit from this conflict. It's a matter of survival for both states, in my opinion. So there you go. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button. If you didn't enjoy it, if you don't agree with me, yeah, thumbs down. I don't care. This is what freedom of speech is about, isn't it? If you enjoyed it, then also make sure you share the video far and wide. You can also follow me on Twitter, BitChute, Steemit, and DTube. I wish you a great rest of the weekend. Take care. Bye.